We lock up as a country a higher percentage of our population than most other countries around the world. We're not any safer as a result, and I think it's becoming pretty well accepted that our criminal justice system is pretty much broken. That we lock people up, it doesn't make us safer, they're not getting rehabilitated, and we've got to think differently. And so we brought on, fairly early on in my tenure, the Vera Institute to help us develop what we call, what they call a Justice Reinvestment Initiative, just to be a whole lot smarter about how we do criminal justice reform. So we found, for example, a very significant portion in our women's prison, it was about 40%, in the men's prison just over 20%, of those who are incarcerated had not actually been convicted of a crime. They were there as pretrial detainees. So they had been arrested.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, in our women's prison at the time, it was about 40%. In the men's prison, just over 20% of the people who were incarcerated. They had been arrested, but they had not been convicted of a crime. And so we looked around the country and said, this doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And because certainly those who are a threat to the public ought to be locked up. But there are a whole lot of people who are locked up who are not a threat to the public. And it wasn't doing them or the rest of society any good to keep them there. So we did a number of things. So we gave much better guidance to our magistrate judges. Those are the ones who make the initial decision when somebody is first arrested, where to go. I understand, I mean, if you're in their position, the safest thing for you to do is to say, okay, we're going to lock the person up because as long as they're locked up, they're not going to go reoffend, and I'm not going to be held responsible for that. But it's not really, it's not a great way of thinking about the system. So we gave them much better guidance, sort of risk assessments. We borrowed a program from New York, which basically said, identified those who were not a threat to public safety and said, okay, while they're out awaiting trial, let's make sure we connect them to the appropriate services. Let's make sure they show up for all of their appointments. And it's a much better way of going. We did a lot of work on reentry. And so preparing people while they're still in prison to come out. For so many of those people, whether it is that they were receiving substance abuse treatment in prison, but then it wasn't available when they came out, they had no transportation when they got out, they didn't have a place to live, they didn't have job skills. And so historically, all of that had really been the responsibility of our Department of Correction, and we changed that around. I actually put our Secretary of Labor in charge, working with our other cabinet secretaries. Then we had a problem. Delaware is we have some public transportation, but we're not an urban, major market where you have subways and everything. And we had a lot of crimes that even if the crime had nothing to do with driving a car, when you finished serving your sentence, you couldn't get your driver's license. Well, what sense does that make? Because we know that being able to get to work is a pretty good determinant of whether or not you're going to stay out of prison. And so we changed the law so that, and it ended up benefiting thousands of people. If your crime did not actually involve driving a car, you could get your license back after you had served your time. So simple things like that as well. But we have a long way to go. In our state, we have a long way to go across the country. But fortunately, the conversation's being had.